Hi, everyone. Get started. My name is Ashley Honore. I'm Climate Emergency Officer at Greenbank City Council. And on behalf of Greenbank City Council, before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognise the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people as the traditional custodians on the land on which our municipality sits. Council recognises the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who contribute to our community, and we pay our respects to the wisdom of elders past, present and emerging. So a bit about me. I'm a Climate Emergency Officer from Greenbank City Council, and Greenbank is of course a part of the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action, which also represents Maribyrnong, Hobsons Bay, Moonee Valley, Wyndham and Melton City Councils. So tonight we'll be bringing the whole Western region of Melbourne together for this new series of webinars on sustainable living, and it's going to be presented by Renew and Talents throughout this year. So this is the first session. It's on buying Greenpower, a topic I'm really excited about. And I do encourage everyone here to keep an eye out for the next sessions to come. We'll be covering a range of topics, including solar and batteries, energy efficiency, energy in the community and electric vehicles, and that will happen throughout the year. And following the sessions, each session webinar will be available on everyone's respective council web pages. So you can view that online after each session. So do spread the word and keep an eye out on your council web pages and communications platforms to hear about the next events coming up. I just wanted to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded, but your video won't be shown, and everyone's questions will be in the form of text, so you won't be going up online following the recording. And a note about the functions of this webinar. The chat function is on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, so simply click on that icon to use the chat. The Q&A function is on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So similarly, click on that icon to open the window, type in your question and press enter. And you can also upvote other people's questions by pressing the thumbs up icons when you see them. You can raise your hand during the session, and that's in the middle of the bottom bar, but that would be to indicate that you would like assistance from tech support. And we'll try to keep all our expert will answer all questions at the end of the session. On that topic, I'd love to introduce our expert tonight, Dean Lombard. So Dean is an energy specialist with extensive experience as a policy analyst and advocate for residential energy users, otherwise known as people, especially vulnerable households and households interested in sustainability and renewable energy. He's been working on issues such as household energy efficiency and fuel choice, consumer protections, hardship assistance, and community energy projects. And this has given him a broad insight into how people and communities can take control of their energy needs and make this system work for them. So without further ado, introducing Dean. And following that, we'll take questions from the Q&A chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Ashley. And it's great to be here talking about this stuff with the community. There's so much interest in the community about all these related things. And it's really, I think it's really important that we share the information that we have and sort of talk about in the community. It's a really great initiative of the councils to have these events and I think of Renew to put them on. So I'll get started. And yeah, as Ashley said, yeah, put your questions in the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. So I'll just get my slides up. And that would be that one there. Great. So this is all about buying green power, which is a way to power your home with renewable energy if you don't have your own renewable energy generation. Firstly, about Renew. Renew is a national community-based organisation. It's been around since 1980, does a whole lot of great stuff. Runs lots of community events to, give people information about being more sustainable in their own homes. develops, advocates to governments and to industry about ways to help people get better access to what they want to do in order to become more sustainable. We've done lots of advocacy in the energy market in particular around, making sure people are able to, connect their solar panels to the grid and do other stuff to help them become more sustainable. And we've advocated for better thermal performance standards in homes to reduce energy usage and make people more comfortable. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on that Renew does, which is an organization that goes right across a whole lot of areas, and also publishes 2 magazines, Renew and Sanctuary. Renew is about sort of green technology for a sustainable future, tools and techniques for living more sustainably. And Sanctuary is very much focused on modern green homes, house design and house features to improve your sustainability. Heaps of info on the website, renew.org.au, so that's a place to look for more information. This presentation is about basically powering your home with renewable energy using Greenpower. The best way to actually power your home with renewable energy and to reduce your carbon footprint is solar panels on your roof. But I want to take a little diversion here just to talk about reducing our carbon footprint. It's good to remember that carbon emissions, the problem of too many carbon emissions in society is a societal problem. It's an industrial problem. It's not really an individual problem. And the whole concept of the carbon footprint, which is, your individual impact on the environment from your use of energy and other things, that actual concept was dreamed up by the oil industry in order to sort of try and push a bit of responsibility onto individuals for dealing with the environmental impact of the way energy is made, and to sort of, try and give themselves a bit of a way out. So that's really important to remember. Yes, we can make a difference. We want to make a difference. The stuff that we do individually does make a difference. We have choices we can make that do reduce the carbon that we emit. But there's also a really important role for governments and industry to also look at the bigger stuff in society to reduce emissions. And a good way to think about this is the experience we've all had with waste. The stuff that we throw in our rubbish bin. You can do a lot to reduce your landfill, but it's really hard to completely eliminate it because everything you buy has packaging. And if you've ever noticed a big change in the amount of landfill that you create, like a big reduction, it usually comes from when companies start to package their products differently, use more recycling, etc. That's really what makes a difference. It's a good example of how, we can make our individual choices, but we're sort of it's also about what larger industry is doing. So I just think it's good to remember that because, we do what we can. It's not our fault. But rooftop solar is basically the simplest and most cost-effective way to use renewable energy in your home. But there's lots of reasons why people can't do that. It might be because you haven't got the right type of roof, or it's too shaded, or you don't have a roof because you live in an apartment block maybe and you don't have your own roof, or maybe you rent so you can't even put stuff on your roof if you've got one. And look, there are ways around all of those issues. Some apartments, can have systems where they can do solar. Owners corporations work it out. There's businesses that do it. Some renters have convinced their landlords to install solar, and increasingly, homes that land in the rental market sometimes have solar because solar was put on, 10 years ago before they were rental homes. But but these and a few other things can limit the ability of people to generate their own renewable energy. So one solution for that, if you still want to use renewable energy at home, is to use this thing called Greenpower. There's some other stuff which I'll touch on very, very briefly at the end: neighbourhood batteries, community energy projects. These are other ways that people can use renewable energy without having their own solar, but they're still they're really not quite happening yet in a way that's easy to access. So that's why we focus on Greenpower for this. The thing about Greenpower is, the basic thing is you pay a little bit extra to buy renewable energy from the grid. And by doing that, you're using renewable energy and you're also supporting more renewable energy being added to the grid. And that's a really important part of it. So what is Greenpower? And I'll give you the quick sort of rundown. There's a lot more complexity you can get into the more you research, and the information's out there, but I'm going to give you the basic sort of intro into it. So it's basically a government-backed scheme that supports new investment in renewable energy and enables people buying electricity to basically get their retailers to buy more renewable electricity. I do want to mention that, there's a few confusing terms that sound similar but are different. 100% renewable, 100% carbon neutral, 100% green power. So I want to explain the difference between those, but do need to take a little detour at the start just to define who's who in the zoo, right? There's generators, they own power stations, they might be coal, they might be solar, they might be wind, they make the electricity. Then there's a retailer, that's a person that you pay for electricity. It might be Origin, it might be AGL, it might be Co-Power or Diamond Energy or whoever. The retailer buys it from the generator and sells it to you. That's sort of what's happening in the market. And then just to add further confusion, some retailers own generators and they are actually, I kid you not, called gentailers, which you have to say very carefully. They make the electricity, they buy it from themselves, and then they sell it to you, which, if that sounds complicated and slightly dodgy, I'm with you. It does sound a bit like that. It's a bit more complicated because it all goes through a market where people can't necessarily control who they buy everything off all the time. But anyway, here's a very quick way to distinguish between these three different things. 100% renewable, and some retailers or generators might call themselves 100% renewable. That's generally when the generation business only owns renewable generators. And Red Energy is an example I've put in here because they basically are a retail arm of like Snowy Hydro. That means that that company, they're making their money from renewable electricity rather than dirty energy, which is a good thing, right? They're becoming part of the solution. Some retailers call themselves, what have I done? I've gone backwards by accident. I'll go forwards again. Some retailers call themselves 100% carbon neutral. That basically means generally they buy as much renewable energy as they can in the market, and then they buy carbon offsets for other stuff. And PowerShop was one of the retailers that for a long time, I'm not sure if they still do now, but for a long time they was like, yeah, we're all carbon neutral. And that's sort of good as well. It means that your usage is not causing extra emissions, but it's not helping to make more renewable energy into the grid. And there's also, and you've probably seen some articles in the paper recently, there's a few issues with some of these carbon offsets, which I'll get into in a second, that means that they're not necessarily all completely reliable as being genuine carbon offsets, but there's certainly some progress to improve that and make it better, because carbon offsets are sort of important in their own way. And then 100% green power is when the retailer buys extra renewable energy for all the energy that you use. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. And the green power actually supports a new investment in renewable electricity. So I like to go, if you're buying green power, you're sort of being part of the solution as well. So that's why we sort of go, if you're really serious and you've got the means to pay a bit extra, then green power is the way to go. It is good to note, though, that the way the electricity market works is pretty complicated, and it all happens in real time. And the electricity that you bought is basically bought the second that you use it, or in 5 minutes, actually, the 5 minutes that you use it. And it's not always renewable at the time that it's bought to power your usage, but green power is like basically subsequent purchasing of renewable energy that meets the green power criteria to the level that you used. That's how it works. And it does get a bit complicated, so apologies if it's not super clear. Green power is not carbon offsets. Carbon offsets are other projects that reduce emissions. And again, if they're authentic, then they're good. And if they're not authentic, then they're not. And carbon offsets are important because there are some emissions that we can't avoid. And that's where carbon offsets, if they're authentic, are okay. But carbon offsets aren't new renewable energy, and they're not really additional emissions reduction. They just sort of try to neutralize existing reductions that we already have. Yeah, they can cancel out unavoidable emissions, but green power actually puts more renewable energy into the grid, and that's the benefit of green power. Green power actually changes the balance between the carbon emitting electricity and the zero emissions electricity in the system. So carbon offsets are great. If you can't avoid flying, you offset your flight, but yeah, it's not making new renewable energy. And that's all in why we sort of say green power is actually using renewable energy and making more renewable energy. 1 unit of 100% green power equals 1 unit of renewable electricity of renewably generated electricity. So if you have a 100% green power plan, every kilowatt hour you use, that ends up being a kilowatt hour of extra renewable generated electricity that wouldn't have otherwise been used. To be green power, and this is how they make it, so it's additional, to be green power, it has to meet these special criteria. That means it's new renewable energy. It's taken from accredited power stations. You know, they are able to generate more renewable electricity because they know that they can sell it to green power people. It's sort of a bit like, you know, if you had a $50 voucher for a restaurant, you could buy a more expensive meal than you otherwise could because you've got the voucher. Green power, knowing that they're going to have green power customers, means that generators can basically make more renewable energy than they otherwise sort of could justify economically, because they know that green power retailers will have to buy it off them. That's pretty oversimplified. It does get a bit more complicated now, but that's essentially how it works. I talked about 100% green power. You can choose a different amount. So if you have 100% green power, like I said, every kilowatt hour you use is green power. If you have 50% green power, then for every 2 kilowatt hours you use, your retailer buys 1 kilowatt hour of green power. So obviously 100% means more green power, but, you know, it is more expensive. It costs about sort of, you know, 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour on top of your regular price to do green power. Some are a bit cheaper, some are a bit more. Not everyone can afford that. If you can afford a bit, but not the whole lot, then you can get 50% or 10% or whatever, and you're doing as much as you can afford. And that's the thing. It's what I go back to when I say it's not all our fault. We can take the responsibility that we're able to take. So, you know, whatever works for you, that's the contribution that you can make. To sort of explain how the green power system works, I'm going to use this little chart off PowerShop's website. I don't endorse PowerShop. They just had a really good diagram that explains it nice and clearly. So that's why I whacked this one up here. We'll talk a bit more about choosing an energy retailer that, you know, meets your criteria for sort of ethics and green power a bit later. This is basically how it works. You use the energy, you're on a green power plan, so you buy green power from your retailer. They buy these extra renewable energy certificates that then are used to pay. They buy them, and they buy them from accredited renewable generators, which gives them that extra income to invest more in renewables, and that basically puts more renewables in the grid, and that increases the amount of renewable energy in the system. That's basically how it works. Again, there's a lot more complexity, but that's the essential sort of dynamic that's happening. There's this whole system, and the whole green power system is designed to make sure the green power is genuine. It's got all these criteria that have to be met. It comes from newer generators. I know 1997 is a long time ago, but it's newer generators built since then that meet the right environmental criteria, which includes the impact that they have on the surrounding environment. So, you know, in the construction and operation. The other thing is, and this is again where it gets a bit complicated, you might have heard of the renewable energy target, and you've probably seen things like, oh, the government's got a target of this much renewable energy by this year. These renewable energy certificates are also the mechanism that are used for the renewable energy target, and they work the same way. A retailer has to basically contribute its share of meeting the renewable energy target, and they prove that they have by basically buying these renewable energy targets, which are like a ticket to show that they bought that renewable energy. The same type of renewable energy certificates are used for the renewable energy target and for the green power system, but you can't use them for both. You have to use them for one or the other. So, you know, take whatever retailer you've got, you know, they've bought enough renewable energy certificates to meet their responsibility under the renewable energy target. And that helps to make more renewable energy. And then if they've got green power customers, they have to buy more on top of the ones that they already have to meet the renewable energy target to do the green power. And that's part of the system that makes sure that the green power is additional renewable energy. So you're actually adding more renewable energy to the grid. It doesn't happen like right away. There's, you know, they have I think it's up to about a year or something to use their renewable energy certificates. So generally, it's like a makeup sort of system. Like, you know, they sell the Greenpower, they know how much certificates they have to buy. They buy them, you know, within that sort of year, and that's the new renewable energy. People sometimes ask, well, how do we make sure it is actually new renewable energy, and they're not just using renewable energy that was already being generated? And that's basically because the energy system is a closed loop. You know, there's already a certain amount of green energy, renewable energy. There's about 30% on average in the Australian electricity system. And when people are buying when these retailers need to buy additional renewable energy because of the Greenpower, there's you know, that basically replaces non-renewable energy because it's a closed loop and you can't just keep adding to it. It's like, you know, if you've got a full, you know, carton of eggs and some of them are one color and some of them are another, if you want to put more eggs of one color in, you've got to take the eggs of the other color out. And, you know, the other way I talk about it is, and especially like an analogy for the renewable energy target and the Greenpower is, the renewable energy target, let's go back to the restaurant analogy that we used before. The renewable energy target is the bowl of chips that comes with your meal. It's already there. It has to be there. You're already paying for it in your normal price. And the Greenpower is when you pay extra and get more chips. You're getting more chips into the system. Chips are renewable energy. I'm not sure how good an analogy that is, but it makes sense to me. What about Greenpower gas? You can't really get Greenpower gas because you can't actually make zero emission gas. And we're talking about natural gas or LPG, which is, you know, natural gas is what's piped to your home from a gas retailer, and LPG is when you buy big bottles that you have onto your home, and they're more common in sort of regional areas. Some retailers sell things that they call green gas, which basically involves buying offsets to negate the emissions from their gas. So that might be sort of net zero if the offsets are genuine again. But it doesn't actually increase renewable energy in the mix. In the future, there may well be renewable or zero emission gas. And you might have heard or read in the paper about, you know, developing hydrogen, which could be made by renewable electricity, so it doesn't have any emissions and it could be used instead of gas. That might be possible in the future. But there's still a lot of uncertainty as to whether that will actually be piped to homes and used as a fuel the same way that we use gas these days, because it's actually cheaper for households just to have one fuel source, like to be all electric, than to have two, because as well as the usage costs, you know, you've got your the fixed cost that you pay to connect. So yeah, we've at Renew's done a lot of analysis of the costs of being a dual fuel home with gas and electricity versus just being a single fuel home all electric. And it's very clear that in almost all circumstances, it's actually cheaper for households to just be all electric, so long as they've got sort of modern, efficient appliances. So probably, as Anya has sort of seen in the chat, you know, it's much more likely that that renewable gas, hydrogen, will be used in industrial applications where they really need to burn something to make something, and probably less likely that it will be used in homes. And yeah, to go back to that whole single fuel thing, like an all electric home using 100% Greenpower is a net zero emission home for its what we call stationary energy usage, the energy that powers appliances and everything. If you also move your transport energy to zero emission, like an electric vehicle instead of petrol, then you can be a fully zero emission home. But then until you start thinking about all the emissions that are embodied in your food and other things that you buy, as you can see, it's pretty complicated to be absolutely, completely no emission. And a lot of it comes down to how industry works and, you know, the decisions made by industries and the rules made by governments around getting to zero emissions. So yeah, that's pretty much most of the lowdown on what Greenpower is. The next question is generally, how do we get green power? And a lot of retailers offer green power deals. And we generally recommend, if people are serious about finding, people might have a retailer they like to go with. So, talk to them, see what they offer with green power, find out what it costs, and then you can make the choice. But, especially in the current times where the energy prices have gone up quite a bit lately and a lot of people are really feeling the pinch, there's quite a few ways that you can actually compare different electricity companies for to work out what electricity offer you want to be on, who you want to buy your electricity from. And in these energy choice sort of websites that exist, you can usually figure out which ones have green power if you particularly want to buy green power. So look, there's two that we normally recommend. And the reason, Renew doesn't generally like to recommend businesses or, specific ways of specific companies to do stuff. But with the energy comparison websites, there's a lot around, and a lot of them are not very transparent in how they make their recommendations. And a lot of them don't actually compare all the energy offers in the market because they run on commissions and they only recommend the ones that they get commissions from. And I did some experimenting a few years ago where I went to a range of different energy choice websites to ask what I should use. And I basically found that they often recommended to me what was not a very good deal because they had to get commission from that company because they have quotas and all that sort of stuff. So there's a bit of work in the policy space to better regulate those websites. But we do recommend in Victoria, the Victoria Energy Compare website, which is independent, run by the Victorian government. And the one commercial one that we do recommend is this one called Whatever, because even though they do work on commissions, they have an express commitment, and we've tested it, and they do basically cover all, or at least most of the energy retailers in the market, and not just the ones that they get commissions from. So we consider that they're also reliable. In both of these energy comparison websites, you can filter your search results by retailers that offer green power plans if you want to do green power. So that's a good way to find, what's a cheaper plan, and can I get green power with it? We find Whatever's a bit easier in some ways to get the green power ones, because you can choose just to be shown 100% green power plans in those, and I think they incorporate the cost into their price, whereas the Victorian Energy Compare shows retailers that offer any types of green power plans. And you need to sort of sometimes work out, okay, how much extra will it cost me? So they're both worth checking out. You could even try them both and see if you get different results. I'm going to step you through, I've got a few screenshots here just to show you how using the Victoria Energy Compare site works. The Whatever site is pretty similar in principle. So before doing that though, and whenever you're choosing an energy retailer, whether you're using one of these comparison websites or whether you're just talking to the one that you're already with, or whether you're just sort of looking at advertisements or whatever, it's good to get a bit of a sense of your energy usage, especially if you're trying to sort of estimate, well, how much might green energy cost me? Because you know that it's between sort of 3 and 5 cents a kilowatt hour extra generally. And when you look at energy contracts, you'll see the exact amount that is extra. So if you know what your daily usage is, you can sort of work it out. So yeah, looking at your bill, and look, bills, they look a bit different, but they're sort of a bit similar as well. The important stuff you need to know and on your bill before it's really working out an energy offer is your billing period, which is usually at the top somewhere, and it's usually 1 month or 3 months in Victoria. Your energy usage, sometimes you might have a few different lines because the price has changed during the year, or because you've got 2 different meters, like one for electric hot water if you've still got that, and one for regular usage. So you might need to add them together. The energy price, price per kilowatt hour is usually there somewhere, and so is the daily charge, which is how much they charge you per day. It might be expressed as a monthly charge or whatever, but that's part of your cost as well, because the cost is partly that fixed charge and partly that usage charge. And yeah, the billing period, you might need that if you're using a comparison site, because in the comparison site, you normally put in how much was your last bill, or how much energy did you use in your last bill, and what was the billing period, and that's how they work it out. The other useful figure on your bill, and this is required to be shown on bills in Victoria, and I think all around Australia actually, is your average daily usage. This is pretty useful just for quick estimates. You know, my average daily usage is, I don't know, 7 or 10 kilowatt hours a day. So that's, you know, times 30, that's whatever, you know, 300 a month or whatever. That's useful for making sort of approximate calculations, especially if you're trying to go, well, how much would this cost me a day if I use Greenpower, you know, times the average daily usage by 5 cents or something. But it's good to remember that usage can vary a lot at different times of year. So if you've got a summer bill, you might have it might be much higher because you've got air conditioning. And if you've got gas heating, then your winter bill might actually be quite a bit lower because you use gas for your heating. So you use less electricity. It depends, you know, if you use electricity for heating, it might be higher. So yeah, the different times of year can affect your usage quite a bit for some people and not much at all for other people. So it's actually good to have a few bills to look at and just to compare the usage at different times of year. So yeah, that's basic good information that helps you sort of make the choice. Now, if you're using Victoria Energy Compare, it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, whatever's pretty similar, I just already had the screenshots from Victoria Energy Compare. So I'll show you this one. You know, you can choose electricity and gas. If you're looking just electricity, just go electricity. But if you're looking at the gas stuff as well, if you've got gas, then, you know, try both. So it's basically sort of click on what you want to do, and it'll ask you a few questions because it needs to work out what's the usage and what's the usage pattern. And if you've got a recent bill, it'll ask you to enter some information from your bill, which on this sort of energy questionnaire thing. But you can also upload it. The system can sort of automatically, or with your sort of, you know, entering some details, can actually go and get the actual energy usage from your energy network business that logs the info from your smart meter, because smart meters have all your usage during all over the day. So they can actually use the smart meter data file in Victoria Energy Compare, and I think in whatever as well, just to get a picture of what your energy usage is. So they use that to calculate what your bill will be with different retailers. That's pretty useful if you do that, except, you know, in some ways it can be more accurate because it's using your actual usage. And that'll be especially the case if you're looking at an electricity offer that has different prices at different times of day. But keep in mind that if your usage has changed significantly since last year, maybe you added a new person to the household, or someone left, or, you know, you had an extension made, or you bought a new major appliance, that can actually change your usage quite a bit from what it used to be. So keep that in mind, that sometimes your historical usage is a good guide to what your future usage will be, but sometimes it's not. If you don't have a bill, and this is a good thing with these sites, you can tick I don't have a bill, and that might be if you're moving house into a new house and you really have no idea what your usage will be like in the new house. But that'll ask you some questions about the size of the house and the appliances, and it'll make an estimate based on a whole lot of research. So again, it's a bit less accurate, but it gives you a bit of a guide. So yeah, they're the options for doing that. Yeah, upload smart meter data automatically. That's pretty swish when it can do that. And then you basically get a bunch of results like this. And it usually by default ranks them by the annual bill down the side here, but you can sort of filter it differently if you want. It's actually got all these features at the side where you can go, I only want certain types of payment arrangements, or I only want to see Greenpower offers. That's obviously in the context of this presentation, that's one that you might be thinking of. You can even pick, I think, you know, particular retailers you're interested in looking at, how long the offer is for, and all sorts of filters. The one I ran here is I just go, okay, let's just show Greenpower to show you that it shows this little icon of a green flower, which shows that these all have Greenpower offers. They don't actually say what the price or detail is on that screen. Is it 100%? Is it, you know, do they offer different percentages? But if you click on the info from the on the website, you'll look at the energy offer detail, and it'll show you more detail about what the prices are, what the Greenpower options are, how much extra the Greenpower is, and all of that. So that's that's a useful way to do it. And like I said, whatever lets you filter just by 100% green power, and it incorporates the price into it. With Victoria Energy Compare, well, you can just look at what the green power is and, you know, times it by the usage. So you can still work it out just a bit more manually. So that's probably the best way to choose if you're looking at what's my best price that also has green power, so I can save money and also be using renewable energy. And, you know, prices change a lot, you know, but it doesn't hurt. Unless you're particularly loyal to your energy company, it's very easy to change retailers these days. And it probably doesn't hurt to check back on these comparison sites, you know, once every 12 months or something, just to see if there's a better deal out there. I know I did when I was doing one of these presentations last year, I thought, oh, I'll check mine. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm paying a lot more than I could be. And I should know better, but yeah. It's easy to forget, and sometimes it's like the retailers rely on people not bothering to check anymore to slowly sort of jack the price up. We're almost done here. I do want to touch on the Green Electricity Guide. This is, and again, when you're choosing a retailer, you've got lots of criteria that you might use. It might be just about the price. You might prefer to go with a big company rather than a small one, or vice versa. You might want to go with, you know, one of the sort of community energy retailers. There's a couple out there. You might want to go with one that is more active on environmental issues. The Green Electricity Guide is put together by Greenpeace. They've been doing it for quite a while now. The most recent one came out about a year ago. And that's the website up there to go and check it out. They basically, you choose your state, and they basically rank all the retailers who are active in that state by their green credentials, basically. And, you know, Greenpeace obviously is an environmental organization, which is why they're interested in providing this information, but they get an independent analysis of electricity providers on their criteria and a scoring system sort of to rank them. So they use 6 criteria, you know, basically that they provide renewable energy, that they're committed to ending use of coal by 2030, that they've committed to holding fossil fuel expansion, that they support renewable energy, that their marketing is honest and transparent, that's not sneaky as some are, and that they have ways to manage pollution and environmental harm of their operations. And, you know, these basically manifest in a few different ways, you know, obviously providing clean renewable energies, you know, the choices that the retailer makes in the energy that they purchase, or if they own power stations, in the energy that they own. But some of the other ones, you know, and this has been quite significant in the energy sector for the last 20 years. And it's certainly something that Renew's seen a lot through its advocacy in electricity industry, has been some retailers have been very proactive in working with government and industry to try to promote lower emissions, good environmental policy, renewable energy targets, you know, emissions reduction targets and all that. And some retailers have sort of obstructed those sort of changes. And that's one of the criteria that Greenpeace uses, is that, you know, if this energy retailer is active in advocacy and in the industry to promote better environmental outcomes, then that gives them higher points in the Green Electricity Guide. And if they have a history of, you know, obstructing and, you know, trying to extend, you know, maximize usage of the coal generation that they might own, then they'll sort of lose some points. So I do recommend, if you're thinking of, you know, if you want to change an electricity retailer, you're looking for green power, looking for good price, it's always good to check the Green Electricity Guide just to see how they rank. And, you know, there's quite a range from, you know, the really bad ones and the really great ones and the whole lot in the middle. So there's quite a bit of range in there for you to look at. I'm sort of almost done here, and then we can go to questions, but I did want to just touch on these things I mentioned at the start, because, you know, if you're thinking about green power, like I said at the start, you're probably thinking about, how can I use renewable energy at home when I can't make it myself? And green power is a great solution for that. But there are other ways that are sort of coming in. You might hear people talk about neighborhood batteries or community energy projects or shared solar. People talk about solar gardens, for example, which means a sort of a solar small solar power station that belongs to a community and that they buy directly from that. These are actually all good ways that people can use renewable energy in their homes without green power and without having their own solar. But these schemes are all quite new. I mean, the concepts have been around for a while, but the way that the energy market is regulated makes it difficult for them to actually work the way that you want them to. You know, oh, I just want to buy my energy from the solar garden whenever it's generating. And then when it's not, sure, I'll buy it from my energy retailer. That's a bit tricky to do in the market right now because of the way the market is regulated. And same as batteries, you know, oh, what if we had a battery in our street and everyone who has solar can put their excess in the battery during the day, and then at night time we can use energy from the battery instead of import it from the grid. And that should be cheaper because the electricity came from our street, it's in our street, and the battery is coming back to our street. That should be cheaper. Well, it's not cheaper because, again, of the way the regulation is for how networks work and how network charges are charged. And there's you know, I could probably talk for hours on this and it would bore you to tears, so I won't. But basically, there's all these pilot projects around on these things. How can we use a battery in our street or in our neighborhood to help us better use the solar that we generate in our community? How can we as a community have a share or own a small renewable energy power plant that we can use, you know, in our communities, so that we're using our own energy that we generate? These pilot studies are out there just to work out, oh, how does it work, and what are the economics like, and, you know, what regulation would you need to change to do it? So these, and I reckon these things are definitely coming sometime in the future. I don't know when, don't know exactly in what form, but they are coming. So if you're interested in this sort of, you know, these sort of things about, you know, using shared renewable energy in communities, you know, keep your ear to the ground. Often these projects, local councils are quite involved in them. So, you know, keep an ear out with, you know, the environmental part of your local council, or if there are community energy groups, you know, they're the ones who will give you the information if any of these things are happening in your area. And like right now, the Victorian government has a big program of neighbourhood batteries where they sort of throw some money to a community energy group or another organisation to put in some neighbourhood batteries and to try them out and to share them with people. And, you know, these are these pilot projects that have special rules so they can operate. And these are all helping to work out what's the best way to implement these great solutions for community energy that we share, and that's renewable. So yeah, absolutely keep your ear out for them. They are happening. They will be happening. They'll be happening more and more. The next 10 or 20 years is going to be huge change in the way that we generate energy and that we use it. And I think a lot of those changes are going to be that the energy is more in our community, and instead of sending energy all around the whole state on massive, you know, transmission lines, will be using much more energy that's generated near us by smaller renewable plant. And, you know, the grid is a bit more of a backup and a support rather than the main game. And that's sort of a quite exciting time, actually, because in the end, that actually helps to keep our energy costs cheaper and makes us more resilient and more sustainable. So I'm certainly looking forward to those things happening. That's pretty much the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening. Like I said, you know, Renew's a really interesting organisation that's, you know, very grassroots organisation. It started actually as a project of Friends of the Earth back in the sort of late 70s. They're very focused on, you know, supporting households and supporting groups like councils and community groups to support households to become more sustainable. So they're a good organisation to check out. They've got lots of resources on their website, information about appliances and about getting solar and batteries and all that sort of stuff. And like I said, they also do great work in sort of trying to change the system to make it better for, you know, better for people to be more sustainable. So yeah, keep an eye out on that. And yeah, thanks for listening to me. I'll be answering some questions, so I'll stick around and do that.
Thanks, Dean. That was great. Really good to hear all that detail of behind the scenes, what's happening with the with Greenpower in the regulatory space as well. So we do have a couple of questions. One that came through direct, I hope Ivy doesn't mind us bringing it up, is in the current economic climate, what percentage of households in the West invest in green power? Do you know anything about percentages?
I actually don't know the answer to that question at all. I have no idea.
Okay. Do you know
Sorry.
general Melbourne or Victoria?
I actually don't even know if that information is particularly publicly available, but I could be wrong. Anja, who's in the session, might know something about that. But yeah, I'd be interested to know.
Okay.
I don't know. I get a sense that it's growing because I hear a lot of people talking about it. So yeah.
Okay, that's good. Well, if we hear anything more, I'll pass that on. I would like to just relevant to that question is I'd like to note that many of the councils in the Western region actually do buy 100% renewable green power through a contract called the Victorian Energy Collaboration. So we buy power directly or via certificates from 2 wind farms. I'm trying to get the name of them up. I don't have it in front of me. In Victoria. And that essentially means that we generate quite a lot of electricity from our solar panels on facilities, at least from what I know of most councils. And the rest is purchased 100% renewable. So, and that's not all councils signed up, but many of us in the West are. So it's a good step forward.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. And like that's increasing the way it has. There's increasingly amounts of renewable energy in the system on people's roofs and businesses' roofs and councils' roofs, and then that can be supplemented by green power that you purchase. I just noticed that Anja got back to us in the chat, and the last annual report a couple of years ago, 90,000 households in Victoria purchased green power. That's quite a few. How many households in Victoria? I think there are about 2 million households in Victoria. And there you go. Greenpower website says 360,000 customers across Australia, which is about 3%. So yeah, okay, that's actually not. There's a lot of room for growth in there, I think. I mean, I do think I think one of the things that limits green power a bit is that it costs a bit more, and in times when people are more conscious of their expenditure, that can be a barrier. So that's why I really think it's more and more important for people who can afford it to do it, to make that contribution. But yeah, it's one of the differences between something like green power and something like putting solar on your roof yourself. When you put solar on your roof yourself, there's this upfront cost, but then you get cheaper energy over time, and that comes back. So they're really both parts of the system. And I spoke to quite a lot of people in the time that I did sort of energy consultations with households when I was at Renew, where people were very focused on, I've got my solar and I thought about getting a battery, but it's not really worth it at the moment for me. So I'll use my solar and I'll buy green power for what I don't use. And then their green power, and that mixture means that, when they can, they're using the renewable energy that they generate themselves. And when they can't, they're using renewable energy that's been generated somewhere else. And that's a good mix.
That's great. Okay, now a question in the Q&As box from Logan. Thanks for a great presentation. Interested in your thoughts on the relative merits of home batteries versus V2G from EVs versus community batteries.
Okay, that's a good question. So V2G means vehicle to grid, and that's I'll step back. So and I'm not an expert on electric vehicles, but basically an electric car has a battery in it that's way bigger than the sort of batteries that you put on your house, several times bigger. V2G or vehicle to grid is a functionality where the vehicle can send stored energy from its battery into the grid, the same way that if you have solar panels, you can send it into the grid. There's actually 3 different ways that electric vehicles can send electricity back out of the battery. One is vehicle to grid. One is vehicle to home, where it can send the electricity into the house to use, but not out into the wider grid. And one is vehicle to appliance, where you basically can plug appliances into the electric vehicle and use its battery. A lot of people say that, when electric vehicles become more common, there might be less demand for household batteries, because when everyone's got an electric vehicle, they've got this massive battery sitting in their garage. and it's going to be much bigger than the battery they buy for their home, and it's sitting there a lot of the time not being used, so you can use it as a battery. I think it's possible. I think it depends a lot on how people use their vehicle, basically, and how much, and also people's tolerance for how much. I think their tolerance for risk in the sense of, do I want to know that my vehicle's always fully charged and ready to go if I need it, or am I comfortable pulling a lot out of my vehicle to use in my home because I know I'll charge it up before I use it next? That's a sort of individual decision, right? But I think that for a lot of people, the vehicle might become the home battery, probably, especially in some places, especially if people live in areas where they don't use their cars very often, but they still need a car. That might be more practical than people who use a car all the time. Electric vehicles are a fascinating issue on their own because there are so many issues with, well, how do you charge them? Do you go out to charge them? Do you charge them at home? We do find from research that people usually charge electric vehicles at home, but then they need an off-road parking area to do that. And a lot of places, especially in inner city areas, actually don't have off-street parking for vehicles. And I know that when I go for my morning run around West Footscray, where I live, I always pass this house that 2 or 3 days a week has an extension cord running across the footpath, taped down with gaffer tape, right into their car, which, by the way, is not legal, I should add, and it's potentially dangerous, but that's what people are sometimes doing because they don't have off-street parking for their electric vehicles. And now I think that's a big issue we'll need to deal with, especially in cities with electric vehicles. But to go back to the question, sorry, I've got diverged a bit. Yeah, look, I do think that electric vehicles will become an important part of the household energy storage system. I think it'll be different for different households. I think home batteries will probably continue to be a part of it too. And I think we'll still see growth in home batteries before electric vehicles are more common and people start to think that they're an option. Especially as batteries become cheaper, which has been happening very slowly. And a lot of people think that it's going to reach a point in a few years where it starts to drop in price more significantly, but there's been some constraints in markets and mining to limit that. And then the third thing that Logan mentioned, the community batteries, I really do think community batteries is going to be a big part of the future, but it's going to take a while before the regulatory sort of stuff is dealt with. And we've basically worked out how to best implement them in communities to get the maximum benefit. And there's always a problem when you have, lots of different players, like you've got the energy network and you've got energy retailers, and you might have other renewable energy product businesses like who do batteries and that. And everyone needs to get their little piece of the pie, but they also want to, evolve the system to make it get more renewable energy in. But yeah, I think that a lot of those issues would be sorted out. How are the benefits shared among the people who invest in them and the people who use them? There's a bit of complexity there, but I do think they'll get sorted out. And the real promise of community batteries, I think, is that rooftop solar continues to grow at a huge rate. Systems are getting bigger, and we're heading towards. I was at a thing yesterday where they're like by 2031 or 35, they expected 40% of houses to have solar on their roofs, which is actually sounds like a lot, but we already have nearly 30 in Australia. I think a bit less in Victoria, more in some other states, but it's really getting up there. And one big role for community batteries, which is a battery in your street or down the end of the street in a park or on a bit of dead land or on a power pole sometimes, is that all those solar panels generating way too much electricity, way more than is needed, which can cause some problems in the grid when there's too much going in and not enough coming out. Community batteries can store that excess solar energy and then put it back into the grid once the sun goes down. I think that'll be a really important use case for community batteries. And it's sort of a way that a community will share the solar that the community generates, and then they'll be able to access it, again, with the right regulatory changes, cheaper energy because of the special pricing that will happen after the changes have been made in community batteries. So yeah, I think that I don't think I've got a simple answer to Logan's good question, but I think that all of those things will be a part of it. And yeah, once the vehicle to grid and vehicle to house stuff is more common and is enabled in the regulatory system, because there's also constraints against that at the moment, that does open up all those options to make EVs another part of the sort of triptych of different battery solutions for communities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question. This is about PowerShop being and whether it's a good option. or whether we should reconsider that, considering they're required by Shell. That was in the news a year or two ago.
Yeah, I think it happened last year, or maybe it was the year before. Yeah, look, certainly a lot of people decided they didn't want to keep going with PowerShop because of Shell. And look, it's a little complicated because, you know, PowerShop, before Shell came along, PowerShop was actually owned by a company called Meridian that owned, it was a New Zealand company that owned wind farms in New Zealand. In Australia, they also only owned renewable generation. And so they were 100% renewable because they owned only renewable generators. They were also 100% carbon neutral because they bought offsets for any electricity their customers used that they weren't able to fulfill with the renewable energy that they had. And they also offered Greenpower. So they were, for a long time, one of the big environmental choices for people. They also had, and this is particularly relevant in Victoria, had a phone app that could give you sort of, you know, real-time information about, or not exactly real-time, but sort of very close to real-time. I think like one day late, detailed analysis of your usage. So that was useful for some people as well. Shell, of course, has a history of being a big polluter, being an oil company. You know, they also, obviously, if you're old enough to remember the apartheid era in South Africa, they were a bit tied up in that as well. So for a lot of people, Shell is like a big bad company. And that's why people didn't want to go with PowerShop once Shell bought them. And, you know, in the end, it's about, you know, where do you end up landing on all of that? You know, companies do change. Some of the big oil companies are starting to move more towards, you know, better, you know, managing their environmental impact. They still have a long way to go. And of course, they have a history sometimes of being obstructionist, which matters more to some people than others about what they used to do. Some people are more focused on what's happening now. Shell certainly did make commitments to, you know, keep PowerShop being an environmental retailer when they bought it. I don't know if they really did, but yeah, a lot of people left. So, you know, I think, you know, for people buying electricity for their home, you've got your different criteria. You've got your price, you've got the environmental credentials of the company, and you need to make a decision based on those different things. And it's partly about how much, well, like, what weight you put on each of those factors for making a decision. And it's partly about what you're able to do as well. The Green Electricity Guide is good for that because if you dig into it, it gives the reasons why they give the ratings to the companies. And it talks about what they're doing to, you know, are they doing bad stuff or good stuff? So that's probably the best advice I can give on that.
That's great. And any other questions? I actually have one question while we wait.
Yeah.
Oh, something come up. Considering a lot of smaller community batteries are coming online, will they automatically be added to the system for purchasing renewable energy certificates? Or is that, I guess, my question is how will that process work in terms of as we add more of that community infrastructure online? Will that be part of the way that people can purchase Greenpower, or how will that work?
That's a good question. And again, it's like, you know, batteries don't generate electricity, so they're not making new renewable energy, but they can make better use of existing renewable energy. That's the distinction. And it depends where they are in the system too. Are they after a massive big battery farm like we have in, you know, some regional areas? Are they in the community on poles and that? I guess I really think about, like, you know, in the end, Greenpower is part of the puzzle. Solar on people's roofs is part of the puzzle. Batteries in the street or elsewhere are part of the puzzle. All these things can help increase the amount of renewable energy that's in the grid. Batteries are interesting. Like we used to often do, Renew used to do like energy consultations with people who are looking at buying batteries and solar panels and that. And we do this analysis of, you know, what's your cost saving by installing maybe solar panels or batteries, and what's your environmental benefit. And at the household level, in the early days, sometimes batteries are a bit less of an environmental benefit than not having the battery, because they just use the same renewable energy that you were using anyway, that you were generating anyway, and instead of being, you know, sent out to the grid, it was just being stored and used later in your house, and then you lose a bit in the system. So it actually, at that household level, at that time, it was becoming actually a bit less environmental, not by very much, just by a bit. But as batteries become more common and as solar becomes more common, batteries are starting to be a more positive environmental impact because they can capture solar energy that otherwise would be wasted. Like, we're now in a situation where there's so much solar in the grid that stuff that your solar panels generate, if you've got them, some of it doesn't actually make it out into the grid because there's not enough demand to use it, so it gets wasted. So it doesn't matter that it was generated, it wasn't used. When a battery can save that and then use it later, that's adding more to the system. It actually means those solar panels are adding more to the system, but the battery is a mechanism by which they do it. And yes, community batteries, as we answered with the last question, they can really be a part of making better use of renewable energy in communities. And yeah, I think that, you know, the whole system of green power and renewable energy targets is going to have to adapt and adjust as these new technologies become more widespread and actually start to affect in a significant way how much renewable energy we use in the system. So yeah, that may well change over time.
Thank you. While we're on this topic, I will plug that we have sessions coming up, especially on solar and batteries, and one on community energy called Energy in the Community, which I think will cover a little bit more of that community battery type stuff. Dean?
That one will be a bit of a deeper dive into that stuff I covered on the last slide. So that will be a bit more of a geeky session for like, here's all that the technology can do. And if you're really interested in, you know, what might be coming in the future and what it might look like and how it might work, that would be a good one to go to.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So please, keep an eye out for those. And once they've happened, they'll be on our website as well. So we can geek out on that then. Logan does have another question. Do you have any thoughts on whether shared solar for apartments will become a thing, or if the hurdles such as getting through owner's corps and lack of big solar rebates will make it too hard, and perhaps apartment owners will go to green power or community batteries or virtual power plants? So the question being, will solar become a big thing for apartments?
Yeah, I can do that, and I can also touch on virtual power plants too. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have gone, I don't know, it's very complicated. Now I have a different view. I think it's definitely coming. There's a few reasons for that. One is that the Victorian government has new policies around what they call embedded networks, which are used in larger apartment blocks when it's like a private electricity network, and they're requiring renewable energy to be used in those embedded networks. So that will incentivize apartment developers to include solar panels and other sort of, maybe batteries as well in their systems, so that they can provide people with renewable energy. And even for existing ones, as well as for new ones, there's a few initiatives around that are absolutely aimed at trying to find out ways to let apartment developers share solar. So, because the typical thing, especially for big apartment complexes, is that it's often a big, tall building, right? So lots of apartments, but the roof space is sort of smaller than there would be if they were all houses, obviously. So there's less room to put solar on to power everybody. So it is challenging for apartment blocks, especially big ones, to power all their usage from solar. But there are some new technologies being developed, one by a company called Illume that's developed this technique for, so it's some equipment that they install in the electrical system of the apartments. And that actually is a system for sharing and optimizing the use of the solar energy that can be collected from the roof of an apartment and then shared with all the residents of the apartment. And there are different ways you can share it because, there's basically different options for how you might share the benefits and the energy, and their system can basically be set differently to share in different ways. So I definitely think this is coming. It's probably going to be a while before it's sort of common. But yeah, no, I definitely think it's coming. And I'm actually more optimistic about the whole solar apartments thing than I've been for a long time. Do we have a lot of more questions, or should I go on about?
There is one more question, which is about the life of solar panels and batteries.
Okay. Oh, well, look, I'll do the virtual power plant bit then, and then I'll do
Yep.
that question because Logan mentioned virtual power plants. For those who don't know, virtual power plants are another way that households can sort of participate in these changes with renewable energy and new ways of running a network. It's basically where a company will, what they call it is literally a virtual power plant. It's like a power station, but it doesn't actually exist in one place. It's made up of a whole lot of different houses scattered around that each have their own sort of solar panels and or batteries. And the way a virtual power plant works is that it works with that whole group of households, and it makes an arrangement with the households to have some usage of some rights to use their solar and batteries at certain times for certain things, and then they pay the household for that. And they might pay it each time they use it, or they might pay it in terms of an upfront rebate. We'll give you half price off the battery if you let us use it, no more than 30 hours a year. And what they do with that aggregated generation or battery is they basically use it in the energy market to provide these things called ancillary services. And that's very complicated to go into, but basically electricity networks are really complex and they can get out of balance and cause problems. And we often see this when there's, those really bad high weather days when systems get unstable because of the way that it's being used. But these virtual power plants will actually send electricity or take electricity from the grid when it needs extra input or extra output in order to keep balanced. Like, there are times when there's too much solar being fed into the grid. That's when a virtual power plant might go, oh, we'll get paid by the grid operator to charge a whole lot of batteries to soak up that extra solar power. And they'll aggregate all these household batteries to do it. And similarly, they can use solar or batteries to stick in extra electricity if there's some issue where they, sudden rise in demand and they need to use more. So that's, I think virtual power plants also will be an interesting thing in the future. And we'll probably cover that in the community energy session. Yeah. Okay, so the other question again was?
Oh, yes. How long do solar panels and batteries last environmentally?
That's a really good question. Generally, how long is a piece of string in some ways, because, anything can break down quicker than you expect it. The typical, a lot of solar panels are guaranteed for 20 or 25 years. I've spoken to people who've got 40-year-old solar panels that are still working. They don't generate as much as they did when they were new because they lose a bit of effectiveness over time. But, this guy, he was like, it's still doing enough for me. It's still good enough. So they can last a long time. Sometimes they can break down early as well. And, that's why it's always good if you're buying solar to look for ones that have got a good warranty. About 20 years is good for solar as a warranty. But basically, I fully expect that most solar panels will last a lot longer than the time they're warranted for, because there's not much that can go wrong with them. They just lose their effectiveness slowly over time. And it's not usually worth ripping them out and replacing them just because of a bit of lost effectiveness. Usually people don't do that unless they want to upgrade to a much, much, much larger system or something. In terms of batteries, it's sort of early days for batteries. A lot of batteries are warranted for 5 to 10 years. And there's a general expectation that they should last 10 years, maybe more. We sort of don't know, because you really need to see, they can do modeling, and these places do modeling to work out how long they last for. But, in the end, we'll know when they've been around for 10 years, how many are still going. Again, there's always some that break down early. And, often one of us hears about a friend or a neighbor who had a solar panel or a battery or an inverter that broke down after 2 years. That doesn't mean that they're all terrible. They might have just got bad luck. Sometimes you buy a computer and it packs up after 6 months, right? And it's just a bad batch. So yeah, generally we normally go 10 years for a battery, 20, 25 years for a solar panel. That's how Renew does its modeling. And same as inverters, which is a component of the solar system, they generally last 10 years. They're often warranted for 10 years. They can last for longer, but they not always. And in terms of environmental impact, there's been, and you've probably seen stuff in the news or on social media about, inability to recycle solar panels and batteries and inverters, and wind turbine blades is another one that you see. At the moment, there's limited options for recycling, but the technology is pretty new, and most solar panels that have been installed are still installed. Not that many have been sort of taken off and thrown away in proportion to how many they've got. There's certainly a lot of businesses working on recycling facilities, because it's going to be a big industry when there's heaps of them around. especially the things like batteries and inverters that will break down sort of sooner. And certainly if you look at it just from a pure sort of physics and chemistry point of view, the components that these things are made of, most of them are recyclable. I mean, basically nearly everything's recyclable if you've got the facility to do it, right? And you have the facility if there's an economic value for a business in providing that recycling service. And we've seen stuff lately like, Red Cycle, the soft plastic recycling sort of finished up. And a while ago, there was some other recycling that suddenly wasn't happening. That's an example of, yep, the technology's there, you can do it, but is there a business case for it? How much does society value it? How much does regulation require it? I think there's a lot of options to make sure that stuff does get recycled. And I think there's a lot of pressure on governments to slowly lift that up. And certainly with these newer energy technologies, I think that when they become much more popular, there will absolutely be a business case for companies to recycle it. And that, that will be a good thing. I think there's more pressure now also for them to be local rather than overseas. And that's a good thing too, because it's supporting industry and jobs and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty confident that this stuff gets sorted out. The other thing about batteries and solar panels is that even when they're no longer good enough to be on your house and connected to the grid, there's a lot of other uses for them. And I know there's a company that would buy old solar panels from people who were upgrading old systems to new systems, and they would on-sell them to people like farmers and that who want to put some solar panels on a shed just to power some equipment in a shed. It doesn't have to be, meet the standards for being connected to the grid, because it's not connected to the grid. It doesn't matter if, they're only giving out 60% of their rated energy, because the farmer just needs as many as can provide the energy that he needs for the stuff in the shed. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for reuse as well. And as you know, reuse is always better than recycling because you're using less energy. So I think reuse of these things, batteries and solar panels, will be an increasing thing as well, so long as there's government commitment to making sure that infrastructure is there to do it.
Got one more comment. I'm looking at possibilities to move to amber electricity. I assume that's a retailer.
Yep.
Is this a good option for dynamically shifting appliance usage, like energy, like air conditioning, battery, and EV charging? Yeah,
so amber is one of these businesses that has a constantly variable price of electricity. And just to step back a second, the way the electricity market works is that every 5 minutes, electricity is sold for the next 5 minutes based on the prediction of how much will be used in the next 5 minutes. And which is just nuts, I think, but that's how it works. And every 5 minutes, that price is different. And there's a complicated way that the price gets set. And I don't understand enough to explain it well, so I won't even try. But basically, this price is constantly changing. And some people might have noticed that feed-in tariffs are a lot lower than they used to be. That's because in the middle of the day, there are so many solar panels, the price is cheap because there's basically more energy than we can use. It's in some ways, it's a classic demand-driven market. When it's a super hot day and everyone's running their air conditioners, the price is expensive because everybody wants more. And then the opposite when no one wants it. So amber basically provides sells at this price based on the ever-changing wholesale price for electricity. That's what they charge for buying electricity from them. It's also what they charge for exporting from your solar panels. So if you've got the ability to, shift your loads around, whether you do that manually yourself or whether you have automation features, and some people use sort of home automation features to do it, you can actually get a pretty cheap energy from a company like Amber that does this, because if you can shift your loads, you can just go, okay, it's expensive, I'm not going to use electricity, or I'm going to use as little as I can for the next 2 hours, and then I'll use more tonight. Like maybe I'll charge up my vacuum cleaner and phones and that overnight, or my car overnight when it's cheap, or in the middle of the day when it's cheap. So yeah, there is an opportunity to do that. In the end, it depends on how much do you want to be involved in sort of micromanaging your own electricity usage, or do you have the ability to use or create an automated system that can automate stuff? And there's actually lots of potential for automating lots of loads in the house, because things like fridges and hot water systems and pool pumps, it often doesn't matter. They need to run a certain amount of time, but it doesn't really matter exactly when. There's a lot of variability in what you can do. There's a big program in Queensland that lowers the thermostat on air conditioners on really hot days when electricity is expensive to reduce pressure on the grid. People in the houses don't even notice that their air conditioners running a tiny bit less, but it makes a big difference to the grid. That's an example of how, you know, you can use automation with a thing like Amber to still have good quality of life and manage your exposure. So I think it's for some people. If you want to be that involved, go for it. If you don't, maybe it's not the best for you. So yeah, I know a lot of people who are on Amber. They love it.
I didn't know about that one. No more questions. Might give it a sec just in case there's one incoming, but otherwise might be time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Just give it one more second, and hopefully no one's frantically typing right now. Okay, I think you might have time to call it, Dean. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and covered some related topics as well, which was fantastic. So yeah, I think we all got a lot of insight into the broader system. And yes, we had a lot of interest, especially in the solar and batteries and community energy side of things. So definitely keep an eye out. Yes, and throughout the year, if you don't catch them live, they'll be up on our council websites as well. So more opportunity to learn about that for sure. Great, thanks again, Dean, and have a lovely night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.